Evans, have you ever chased a man because of a drunken fight and beaten him to death?
No, outside of this time.
And because he looked like Vincent Chin. Isn't that right, Mr. Evans?
No, that's not right.
The lawyer, we now turn to the summations. The lawyer summed up on June 26, 1984, focusing on the issue of motivation.
There really is only one reasonable explanation for Vincent Chin's brutal killing. In the minds of Ronald Evans and Michael Nitz, Vincent Chin was a chink who dared to stand up to them. Vincent Chin and his friends were having a good time, spending a lot of money, and that bothered Ronald Evans. And Ronald Evans began a barrage of racial insults, obscenities directed at Chin's mother. He was talking about foreign cars and because you motherfuckers, we in the auto industry are out of work. But ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to decide that Ronald Evans and Michael Nitz acted with any racial intent just on the basis of a few derogatory remarks. Rather, examine what they did and you'll be convinced of why they did it. When they walked into the Fancy Pants Lounge that night, they could only know two things about Vincent Chin: that he was an Oriental and that he was having a good time. They, of course, had never met him before. They saw an Oriental acting flamboyant, spending a lot of money. How do you think Ronald Evans reacted to that? Now, the racial animal inside Ronald Evans had been unleashed, and now his prey was anything Oriental. The brutality and the ferocity of the attack on Vincent Chin tell you that this was no mere barroom brawl that got out of hand. After Michael Nitz got Mr. Chin in a bear hug, Evans' savage and repeated use of this bat, even after Chin lay motionless on the pavement, cannot be reasonably explained by mere anger or revenge. Oh yes, Ronald Evans might have said he was sorry, but he wasn't sorry for killing Vincent Chin. Ladies and gentlemen, he was sorry for letting this racial animal out on a rampage. You remember, he was subjected to at least one other episode of that racial animal unleashed. Remember the testimony of Willie Davis? Defendant Evans called him a nigger and a black son of a bitch and accused him of chasing white women. The defendants are wrong in saying that this was nothing more than some barroom fight. This was violent hatred turned loose. This was years of pent-up racial hostilities and rage unleashed. This was a modern-day lynching, but they used a bat instead of a rope.
The defense counsel argued that the issue of race was a mere fabrication.
How did this tragic case become infused with race? Meetings with witnesses happened, and into this scenario of intoxicated violence, witnesses began to inject, as Mr. Jimmy Choi stated, their thoughts and ideas and images of possible racist motivations. A transformation of facts occurs because people went back in their minds to take a second look at what happened, see if they could come up with any evidence to support a second prosecution. Suddenly, when Vincent Chin said, "I'm not a motherfucker," it was in response not to being called a motherfucker, but simply being called a chink or a nip, and some reference to out of work and foreign cars. What had never been a racial incident had now become one, and it became one gradually. That's why you have 3 different racial allegations made by 3 different people at 3 different times. People worked hard with each other and their attorneys, searching their minds, the dark recesses of their minds, to find something, anything, that could make this a racial event. Vincent Chin was the same as Ronald Evans, a human being. He was not a person who had only great virtues and no faults. Vincent Chin got drunk and went to nude bars and started fights, and then he wanted to finish the fight. Mr. Evans, like Vincent Chin, became full of rage, and he wanted revenge. And Vincent wanted to finish the fight. Does that make him a hero or a martyr? Ladies and gentlemen, none of this happened because of Vincent Chin's race.
You just heard 2 hours of deliberate confusion, which is a defense tactic that's always used when their evidence starts to line up strongly against them. They want you not to be able to see through the clouds, to your conscience, and to do what's right. They got these charts out here, and they crossed off names of witnesses. But there are 3 names missing from that chart who could tell you what happened that night. Vincent Chin, because he can't tell you, and the defendants, because they wouldn't tell you. Vincent Chin came to this country when he was 6 years old, and then he voluntarily became an American citizen. And that's what America's all about. We're not niggers, we're not kikes, we're not Polacks, we're Americans. And as Americans, we must condemn this type of racial violence. Now, we as prosecutors have worked hard to defend this justice. But you all represent that justice in this case. And justice to this case requires, no, it demands, that a verdict of guilty be returned against the defendants. Now these defendants, they've had a fair trial, and now it's up to you to do your duty, to hold them responsible for their actions.
After the jury began its deliberations, the defense filed a motion for mistrial based on the prosecutor's misconduct, which focused on the prosecutor's use of inflammatory comments in closing argument. The motion was denied. On June 28, 1984, the jury returned its verdict.
In the case of United States of America versus Ronald Evans and Michael Nix, the verdict form reads as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant, Michael Nix, not guilty as to count 1 and not guilty as to count 2. We, the jury, find the defendant, Ronald Evans, not guilty as to count 1 and guilty as to count 2.
The jury thus found Evans guilty of violating the civil rights of Vincent Chin on account of his race. He was sentenced on September 18, 1984. After hearing from defense counsel, Judge Taylor gave Evans the opportunity to be heard, and then, without elaboration, she announced her sentence.
Mr. Evans, is there anything you would like to say?
Only, Your Honor, again, I've expressed my regret and remorse on several occasions, and I would just like to reiterate that one more time. I'm sorry for what happened. I can't say anything more than that. At this point, I have no recourse but to depend on the American system of justice and to you, Your Honor.
Is that all? It is adjudged, Mr. Evans, that you are committed to the custody of the Attorney General for a term of 25 years. It will be recommended that you be committed to an institution where you may receive treatment for alcohol abuse.
Evans appealed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. Circuit Judge Albert J. Engel issued the court's decision on September 11, 1986. The court addressed several issues, including Evans's argument that the federal civil rights law in question did not extend to Orientals. The court rejected this argument, holding that the statute protected any person because of his race, color, religion, or national origin from intimidation or interference in the enjoyment of public accommodations. Citing the historic case of Vic Woe v. Hopkins, Judge Engel wrote,
Orientals come within the broad constitutional protections of the 14th Amendment, even though the original thrust of the amendment was primarily motivated by concern for the rights of black persons.
Judge Engel also rejected the argument that Judge Taylor erred in refusing to transfer the case because of pretrial publicity.
We have carefully reviewed the extensive record made of the publicity in this case and agreed that it was indeed pervasive. the nearly unanimous public judgment that Evans and his stepson should have received jail terms and the harsh criticism of the state trial judge, followed by the federal prosecution of defendants based upon the same incident, were bound to lead to a strong public impression that justice had not been done in the state court and that it was incumbent upon the federal government to right that wrong by a second prosecution. While it probably would have been advisable for the trial judge to have ordered a change of venue, we conclude that there was not reversible error for the trial judge to proceed to impanel the jury.
Ultimately, however, the Sixth Circuit held that Evans was denied a fair trial. The court concluded that Judge Taylor had erred in allowing a witness to testify about racist remarks about blacks purportedly made by Evans some 10 years earlier. The court also strongly disapproved of what it described as inflammatory language by the prosecution in summation. Notably, the court held that the prosecutor's statements about asking the jury to do its job as Americans to convict the defendant in order to condemn this type of racial violence violated a prosecutor's ethical standards. The court was most troubled, however, by Judge Taylor's ruling not to allow the defense to introduce the tape recordings of the meetings Liza Chan had with the witnesses. Instead, the judge limited the defense to use of the transcripts, not the audio, and only those portions of the transcript that were spoken by the actual witnesses, not other persons.
Evans and co-defendant Nitz sought to introduce into evidence tape recordings of interviews which had been conducted by Liza Chan with these witnesses. The defense purpose was to demonstrate that the witnesses' testimony concerning Evans's racist statements was false, and that it was the result of improper coaching of them by Chan in the preparation for the trial. Each time the defendant sought to introduce the tapes, however, the court sustained a government objection on hearsay grounds. The government concedes that these rulings were erroneous. We unanimously conclude that a consideration of the relevant factors mandates reversal. Evans should have been permitted to introduce into evidence the entire contents of the tapes. The three witnesses were the most crucial of all witnesses for the government. It is true that the district court permitted the defense to elicit a few of the statements, but it was not within the province of the court's proper discretion to prevent the jury from hearing the tapes themselves and judging for themselves the impact upon the witnesses which the purported conversation had, and measuring that against the statements made in court by the witnesses.
The Court of Appeals was so troubled by what it had heard on the tapes that it included, as an appendix to a decision, excerpts from the meeting of Liza Chan and Vincent Chin's three friends who testified at trial. Liza Chan was only 3 years out of law school at the time, and she was not a litigator. She met with the witnesses as a group and recorded the conversations. We're going to reenact portions of the meeting for you now.
The purpose of this meeting tonight is so we can help each other remember exactly what happened, how it happened, when it happened, and all the minor details. So I was talking this afternoon with a parking lot attendant, the black guy. According to his version of the facts, it's quite different from what I've so far understood them to be. So I would center on what you, the three of you, say they are, and somehow try to fit all the facts around these. So we're going to agree to the story. This is it. When it's a federal prosecution, we're all going to have to be agreeing on this is what happened. Now, don't agree. Like, you definitely remember certain things happened. Say it's a black car, you definitely remember it's a white car. You're kind of okay, you know. Other than that, let's all have it down, okay? Pat. Is it 5 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? Is it more like 8 minutes? Let's all agree. Otherwise, y'all look funny on the stand. Okay. Y'all supposedly were there.
So is there any harm in getting too accurate? Because they you all rehearse this. Like if you're in court and we all have exactly the same time,
I mean, as long as you're within, you know, you can say 8:10, you